UnCanadian by Be Constant Undertones Part 2. I told myself this would be simple, a no-brainer. No room for doubts or hesitation. I'd brought it up earlier, and he'd seemed to agree. Surely, when the time came, he'd rise on his own without hesitation. Interrupting him wasn't an option. Not today. One wrong move, and everything would explode. Not when the stakes felt so impossibly high. So I stayed still with a strained smile stretched across my face. Manners. I had to remember my manners, I reminded myself. My throat tightened. Fear was so familiar it felt like second nature. But this time I couldn't let it. This wasn't just about me. For our baby I had to speak. "James," the whisper barely left my lips. He froze, his back up straight, fingers hovering above the keys, his head tilted. I hoped it was even the smallest acknowledgement of my presence. Everything would be all right. He'd get ready. I felt the tiniest hint of relief, hope. Then slowly he raised a finger, a silent signal, demanding quiet. His face, deliberate and composed, lingered in my mind. There was a time when that expression melted me, when the tender focus in his features spoke of love, not calculation. That same twitch of his lips once felt intimate, making me feel special and cherished. My mind scrambled for answers. His ears seemed to perk as if tuning into something only he could hear. I hesitated, then, obedient as ever, tilted my head and strained to listen too. Maybe I'd missed something, some sound, some reason for his sudden stillness. And then I heard a soft, deliberate cough. His lips twitched. Was it a smile or just the way his face settled when lost in thought? I couldn't tell anymore, and I didn't have the energy to care. Not now, not with everything teetering on the edge. Was he laughing at me? Mocking me? Laughter spilled from him, sharp and biting. He couldn't help himself. It wasn't charming. It wasn't a joke. Not today. To him, it might have been harmless teasing. To me, it was a reminder. I didn't matter. Not really, not enough. No, that couldn't be true. No one could be that cruel. Not James. Did anything else ever matter to him? Did I? No, I couldn't bear it. This would unravel me, that every sacrifice I'd made, every moment spent twisting myself into who he needed, had been for nothing. The thought that he'd been laughing at me all along was unbearable. I pushed the doubts and bitterness back down where they belonged, refusing to believe it. It wasn't true. It couldn't be. He returned to his precious piano as if nothing had happened. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the piano and his music, as if he paused only to remind me how little I mattered. Since he refused to look at the sheet music, he'd lost his place. Of course, he couldn't simply pick up where he'd left off. No, that would be too practical. Instead, he started over, from the beginning. My hopes sank as I did the math. 9 minutes. It would take him 9 full minutes to stumble his way through Beethoven again, and every single second would feel like an eternity. 9 minutes of me standing there, trying to summon the courage to make him stop. 9 minutes. Just 9 minutes. I told myself I could endure this one more time. I just had to smile, nod, and fake admiration for the man I had once believed was a genius. But we didn't have 9 minutes. We barely had enough time if he hurried, if he took a quick shower, got dressed and moved. But James never hurried. Not for me, not for us. But this wasn't my classroom. This wasn't a place where I had the authority to interrupt, correct, or guide. No, this was James's domain, where his mistakes were untouchable, shielded by his ego and my silence. So I stood frozen, my frustration boiling beneath the surface, my hands clenched at my sides, feeling trapped by the sound of failure masquerading as art. It wasn't just the mistakes that grated on my nerves. It was the same mistakes over and over again. The wrong note here, the rushed tempo there. Always predictable, always infuriating. My students wouldn't dare let something like that slide, not with me in the room. If this had been one of my lessons, I'd have stopped him mid-note, pointed out the error, and made him start over until he played it right. But this wasn't a lesson, and James wasn't my student. Somehow that made it worse. This was James. My stress surged to a 10, and there was no sign of relief on the horizon. Maybe he didn't hear me. Maybe he's lost in thought. But what if he did hear you? What if he just doesn't care? What if this is his way of showing you? No, I muttered under my breath, shaking the thought away. James loved me. He loved our baby. The idea that he could ignore me, on purpose, was absurd. Foolish, even. Of course he loved us. He had to. This wasn't just about me. It was for us. For our family. I stepped closer. I tried to steady my voice, but it betrayed me anyway. I could hear the fear trembling within it. This time I forced my voice to be firmer, louder. "James, did you hear me?" Then it came, the ultimate insult. A sound, guttural, thoughtless, a grunt. It wasn't even a word, just a noise, dismissive. He didn't even look up. His indifference cut deeper than the music ever could. It was low and sharp, slicing into me. Sometimes his grunts had a bark to them, an irritated snap that made my skin prickle. Other times they growled deep and guttural, a warning not to come closer. This one was somewhere in between, a half-hearted blend of dismissal and disdain. I never knew what the grunts meant until I forced myself to push past the fear. Speaking to him when he was like this was always a challenge. My courage wavered, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. Normally, this would be the point where I'd give up. That's how it always went. I'd give in, and he'd win. That was our pattern, the one we'd fallen into for as long as I could remember. James was betting today would be no different. But I couldn't back down, not this time. This wasn't just another argument or another moment where I could let him have his way. This appointment was too important. It wasn't just about me. It was about something far bigger than either of us. I couldn't afford to give up, no matter how hard he tried to push me into that familiar corner. He didn't even bother to look up from the piano, just kept his head down, fingers gliding over the keys, that smug little grin tugging at his lips, a reminder that he held the power, that no matter what I said, it was his decision whether or not to care. But I kept trying, again and again, forcing myself to stay calm, to speak softly, gently. "James, do you remember agreeing to go to the doctor's appointment with me?" I asked, my voice sugar-sweet, as if that would make a difference. He continued to play the piano, as if the music existed in a world separate from me. Once I would have watched him in awe, utterly captivated. But now, how had I ever thought it was beautiful? The notes felt cold, hollow, something that was never real. The realization struck, sharp and merciless, because I loved him. That was the truth. I loved him, and through that love, I had made his music into something it wasn't, made him into something he wasn't. Perfect? No. Good? Not even close. Our marriage was plodding, lifeless, a hollow shell of what it should have been. How many moments like this had I ignored? How many cracks had I smoothed over, convincing myself they didn't matter? I realized it wasn't beautiful anymore. It was just noise. No. I shook my head, a quiet refusal. There were two of me now. One, the battered woman who still loved him, who clung to the hope that he might someday become the man I once thought he could be. And the other, a bitter, weary stranger, fed up with the lies, the wasted potential, and the relentless years slipping through my fingers. One part of me wanted to love him. The other was ready to walk away. I was losing something, but I didn't know what. My sanity, or who I used to be. I felt cheated out of the life I thought I'd have, out of the love I thought I'd found. "Don't say it! Don't even think it!" I whispered, tears streaming down my face as the pressure was building. Every glance at the clock, every dismissive shrug of his shoulders began to ignite something deep inside me, raw and dangerous. This wasn't the first time he'd done this, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time felt different. I wanted to speak, to scream, to do something, but I swallowed it all down, forcing it into that same place where every unspoken frustration and stifled scream lived. Except it wasn't gone. It was there, bubbling beneath the surface, growing hotter, heavier. What happens when there's no more room to hold it all in? And he just kept going, oblivious, or worse, aware. Did he enjoy this? Did he want me to break? I buried it, all of it. But it was too much, too much. The room felt smaller somehow. And then it happened. I didn't choose it. I didn't plan it. I snapped. "You're here. You didn't leave. That means everything to me. No one else listens. No one else sees me. But you. You're different. You hear me. You see me. Do you understand how much that matters? Please don't disappear. Stay with me. Like and subscribe. So I know I'm not alone. So I know you're real. Because if you're not, then what's left of me might vanish too.